everybody. Mr. John, Sunday school lesson. This will be our last week in parables. I decided to cut short, so we're going to do something different. And I think you'll like it, but I won't tell you what it is till next week. So my job today first is going to say hi to you all again. I know you like it when I say your names, but I'm going to start at the end of the alphabet. Because after all, usually the A's always get to go first. So we're going to start at the end of the alphabet and we're going to go backwards. So hi to Wyatt. Wyatt, you got almost the last name on earth. We don't have any Zechariah, Zephaniahs here, but to Wyatt, I say hi. And to Riker, and to Pearl, and Peyton, and Peyton, and to Nevi, and Nikki, and Noel, to Mason, and Lucas, and Liam, and Caitlin, to Jonas, and Haley, and Hayden, and Gemma, to Emma, and Emily, and Eliza, and Evalie, to Drew, to Charlie, to Colton, hi, to Bauer, to Austin, to Annalyn, to Adora, to Abigail, and to all you high schoolers whose names I didn't even mention, hi. I hope you're watching. I hope you're here. We're going to sing. I forgot to announce the song last week, but this week we're going to sing, like always, with emotions. And our song today is going to be Counting on God. And you'll kind of see how counting on God is worked right in with the parable that we're talking about. So let's stop right now and let Megan lead us in Counting on God.
More
we're back. We're back. And joy unspeakable and all those wonderful emotions about I'm going to count on God. Well, today we're going to read a parable, the last parable that we'll study. Do you remember what a parable is? A short story with a deep heavenly meaning. A parable is that. We've studied a whole bunch of parables. Today our last parable is found in the book of Luke. It's in the book of Luke, chapter 16, and it's about a rich man and Lazarus. But before I talk about that parable, let's talk about squirrels. Yeah, squirrels. You see, I got a squirrel in my yard, and it's building a nest halfway up an enormous oak tree. And I got to see something I've never seen before. The squirrel was making leaves into its nest, and it would be on the ground, and it would gather the leaves, and of course it needs its front paws and back paws to climb the tree, so it would stuff the leaves in its mouth. And this little squirrel had all these leaves in its mouth, and it would hightail it up the tree, put the load of leaves inside the tree, the knot of the tree where it's building its nest, and go back down the trunk. And I saw it do that over and over and over again. Now that's a pretty neat squirrel, pretty special squirrel. But what about the squirrel that I saw on the way to church? It was lying on the road, and it was dead. But what's the difference between the squirrel in my yard? It's got a bushy tail, it's got 4 limbs, it's got claws, it's got 2 eyes, 2 ears, a mouth, it can run. And the squirrel that's lying dead on the road, it's got a bushy tail, it's got 4 limbs and claws, it's got 2 eyes and 2 ears and a mouth. It even has all its blood. There's no blood on the pavement. It's just lying there. It was maybe struck by a car or a truck and died. What's the difference? Well, yeah, one's dead and one's alive, but what does that mean? What does it mean to die? And what happens when we die? Well, the best way to think about dying is that your soul spirit, the real you, the inner you, gets separated from your body. Your body is you also, but it's not the most important part of you. And your body, of course, grows, but then as you get older, it starts to fall apart. And then if you get real old, like grandma and grandpa, great-grandma and grandpa, you die. And your soul and your spirit is separated from your body. Now, I don't know what happens to a squirrel's soul and spirit, but that's what happens to animals too. When animals die, something is gone. Their soul spirit is no longer in their body. Their body isn't just broken, it's separated from the soul spirit. And we're going to see in this parable just that exact thing. We're going to see what happens when somebody dies. Now, I'll bet that none of you have ever had a Bible lesson on hell. I'll bet you never had. I bet you know what that word means. At least you maybe think you know what it means. But Jesus was a wonderful teacher. He was God. And he wanted us to know what happened when we die. He wanted us to know about heaven and hell. He taught us this parable to help us understand. Now, Jesus warned of hell 12 separate times in our Bible. But this passage today is the only passage in the entire Bible that tells us the actual thoughts and feelings and words of somebody who's going there. So it's a pretty neat parable. Let's read it. I'm going to read from Luke chapter 16. I'm going to read verses 19 to the end of the chapter, and then we'll go back and we'll talk about it. Now there was a certain rich man. We don't know his name, just called rich man. And he dressed in purple and fine linen all the time, gaily living in splendor every single day. And there was a certain poor man named Lazarus, who was laid at the gate of the rich man who had all these possessions and all this food. Now, Lazarus was laid at the gate of the rich man, and Lazarus was covered with sores. He longed to be fed with the crumbs which were falling from the rich man's table. Just the crumbs, just the leftovers. Besides, even the dogs were coming to lick Lazarus' sores. Now, it came about that the poor man died, and he was carried away by the angels to a place called Abraham's bosom. We'll talk about that in a minute. And the rich man also died, and he was buried. Now in Hades, he lifted up his eyes, being in torment, and saw Abraham far away and Lazarus in his bosom. And he cried out and he said, Father Abraham, have mercy on me. Send Lazarus, that he may dip the tip of his finger in water and cool off my tongue, for I'm in agony in this flame. But Abraham said, Child, remember that during your life you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus had bad things. But now he is being comforted here, and you are in agony. And besides all this, between us and you, there is a great chasm fixed, in order that those who wish to come over from here to you may not be able, and that none may cross over from you to us. And he said, that is, the rich man said, I beg you, Father Abraham, that you send Lazarus to my father's house. I have 5 brothers. Oh, that he may warn them, lest they also come to this place of torment. But Abraham said, they have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them. But he said, no, Father Abraham, if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent. They will change. But he said to them, if they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be persuaded if someone rises from the dead. Wow, that's quite a parable. That's quite a lesson that Jesus was telling us. And I don't have much context for this story. I don't know exactly who he was addressing, so it's probably meant for all of us, for anyone who wonders what happens when we die, when our bodies stop working and our soul and spirit is no longer in our body. What happens? Where does our soul spirit go? And what is this place that they ended up in? Because it seemed to have 2 sides, didn't it? It had a good side and a bad side. And it was called Hades. But is Hades the same thing as hell? Some people think so, but they just really don't know because they've never really been exposed to the whole truth of the whole Bible. So we're going to talk more about this parable and learn about these things today. So, let's see. 2 men. We have a rich man and we have a poor man. We have rich men and poor men today, don't we? There's always going to be those who have more wealth and more food and more everything than other people who are poor. Now, notice Jesus doesn't say it's a bad thing to be rich, and he doesn't say it's a good thing to be poor. He's simply saying there are rich people and there are poor people. We don't know the rich man's name, but we know that he had 5 brothers. So he came from a pretty large family. Now, the rich man lived daily, and it doesn't say this, but it's there in the parable. The rich man lived daily, and he enjoyed his life, but he thought little about God. He basically lived without God. And we know that because of where he ended up. Now, Lazarus, the poor man, he had nothing. He had absolutely nothing. He had not enough food to eat. As a matter of fact, he had to beg for the crumbs off the rich man's table. He had no clothes to wear, just rags. He was sick and not in health, and even the dogs licked his sores. He had nothing, but he had more of God than the rich man. He lived with God on earth. He had hope in God for the future. So when they both died and their souls were separated from their bodies, they both went to a place called Hades. Let me read a verse from the Old Testament that talks about Hades. In the Old Testament, the word Hades was Sheol. You maybe have read that in the Psalms sometimes. Sheol in the Old Testament is the same as Hades in the New Testament. I'll read a verse about it and tell you exactly what it is. From Psalm 89, it says, from Psalm 89, I'm going to get my phone open into my Bible version, and it says, no one can live forever. Everyone is going to die. No one can escape the power of Sheol. Sheol is the place where a person's soul spirit goes when they die. When it leaves their body. Now, where is this place? Everybody talks in the Bible about it being in the earth, in the grave, deep down in the earth. But to be perfectly honest, we don't know where that place is. Just like heaven is always talked about being up there, being high in the heavens. But we really don't know where heaven is either. But it is a real place that contains real soul spirits of people who have died. Now, let's get back to the parable. You know what's amazing here is that there are 2 sides. There are 2 parts to Hades. There's a bad part where the rich man ended up. There's a great big divide and chasm that separates the bad part from the good part. And then there's a good part where Lazarus ended up. And here's a really interesting part. The good part had a name. The good part of Hades was called Abraham's bosom. Now, bosom means breast. In Abraham's bosom, you got to think about a new mother like Brittany Strum. And Mason, if you're listening, your mother just snuggles that new baby Leo to her breast, to her bosom. It's a place of comfort. It's a place of rest and security. And that part of Hades is called Abraham's bosom. And that's exactly what it said. The poor man died, and his soul was carried away by the angels to Abraham's bosom. And the rich man died, and he was also carried away, but he was on this side of Hades, where it was a place of torment, not a place of comfort. Hades isn't hell, but it's where departed souls go before the final judgment and before people are in heaven and hell. Now, Here's another exciting thing here. You learn something about Hades you never knew before. Two parts, a bad part and a good part. The good part's called Abraham's bosom. Here's another exciting part. The other name for Abraham's bosom is paradise. Do you remember when the thief was on the cross with Jesus, what Jesus said to him? He said, "Today you will be with me in paradise." That meant that Jesus, when he died on the cross, went to Hades, and the Bible even talks about that. It talks about that in one special place in the book of Ephesians. And it says, Jesus descended into the lower parts of the earth. And after he did that, he then ascended up on high to the heavens and led a captive, a whole huge group, a host of captives back up to heaven to be with God. Now here's what's really fun and really interesting. Our Apostles' Creed teaches us that Jesus was crucified, dead, buried. He descended to Hades, and then he rose from the dead, and he ascended to heaven. Jesus emptied out the good part of Hades. He emptied out paradise. He emptied out Abraham's bosom, and he brought all those people up to heaven with him to be with God. And as far as I know, as far as I understand, from now on, when people die and they're saved and they're people who are right with God, those people's souls and spirits no longer descend to Hades, to Abraham's bosom, but now they go directly to be with God. But let's go back and finish with what happened to Lazarus. It's not to Lazarus, but to the rich man. Because like you heard me say, this is the only place in the Bible where we actually hear the thoughts, the feelings, and the words of someone who is in the bad part of Hades and who is going to go to hell. The first thing you see is that that person is awake. They don't have a body, and yet they're conscious, they're aware, they're thinking, they're feeling. In this particular case, he seems to tell us it's very, very hot. It's very dry. He's in torment. He's parched. He wants relief. He recognizes that this is a very, very bad place. And he sees across this great chasm a better place. And here's where it's so sad. Because he's told he can never cross the chasm after he has died. He'll never ever get another chance to be in Abraham's bosom, to be comforted by God, to be brought up to heaven, to be with God. Your only chance to go to the good side is to believe here in this life. So, let's just end with talking about a poor rich man and a rich poor man. Who was the poor rich man in our story? It was the unnamed rich man who had everything on earth, but he lived without God, and he died without God, and he'll forever remain separated from God. So he was a very, very poor rich man. On the other hand, we have a poor man who we know is named Lazarus, but he wasn't a poor man. He was a rich poor man. He was a rich because he knew God in this life. He knew God and prayed to God and received God's forgiveness. And he was brought to Abraham's bosom and then to heaven, not because he was poor, but because he lived with God. And so in heaven, he was even richer. He had even more of God. So we have a poor rich man and a rich poor man. Which one do you want to be? Which one do you want to be? You know, the man in our story begged that his family could hear this truth that I'm telling you today. And Abraham, speaking for God himself, said, they wouldn't listen. Your family wouldn't listen if a man rose from the dead. They have the Bible. They have the law and the prophets. They have everything they need to guide them into the truth. But will they listen to this truth? I hope you're listening to this truth. I hope you're living this truth. And I hope all the parables that we have learned have helped you live in the kingdom of God, under the rule and reign of God in your heart, so that when we depart from this earth, when our soul and spirit is taken from us, it won't go down to Hades and then to hell, but it'll go up and be with Jesus and be with God. Like the words of the song we sing, I'm counting on God. How about you? Amen. See you next week, and we'll talk about a brand new curriculum that we're going to learn.